had a couple of hurdles trying to get everything set up in the studio, so we're going to see how this thing plays out. Welcome back to the live stream, y'all. It's also episode 2 of the Unstuck Sessions podcast. On today's episode, we're going to talk about a problem. And here's the thing. I am calling an audible. I'm changing up the topic because I'm going to save part 2 initial podcast for a later episode. Today, I want to talk about failure to launch and how learning can become a sticking point as a business owner or aspiring business owner. And so I have a couple of stories that of my experience with it, and hopefully this can be beneficial to you. So that's what I got on today's episode. We're going to roll the intro and then we're going to dive into this thing. Peace. All right, before we get too far into this thing, I got to make a couple of comments here. If you have questions or anything, feel free to post them in the chat and I'll try to answer them as we go along. Make sure that you put your name beside. If you want me to shout you out, make sure you include your name in the comment so I can see who you are. I'm running it across the bottom of the screen. If you post a comment, I may not be able to see who you are. Drop a name so I can shout you out. And with that, we're going to get started. So last week we talked about if you are the sticking point in your business. And it ended up becoming a 2-part episode. I'm going to have part 2 a little bit later on because there's something that I feel like needs to kind of preface that entire sticking points in your business conversation. And this is primarily the sticking point that keeps people from executing their vision, moving ahead with their business, or stepping out on the ledge and trying something new, maybe a career change or whatever. The thing, I call it failure to launch as a sticking point. What that means to you is you have this fantastic idea and you get so mired down in the details and hypotheticals and one specific area, which is learning, where you feel like you don't know enough, that you never actually take the steps to move the thing forward. And I'm going to talk about specifically today how learning can be a sticking point in your entrepreneurship journey. And I'll talk about how it's affected me. And it's a savage sticking point because, and this is an important point that I'm going to keep coming back to again and again throughout the podcast. The secret about learning is the more you know, the more you learn how much you don't know. Let me repeat that. I'm going to try to rephrase it. The more you learn about something, the more you learn about how much there is to know about that specific thing. And the process of learning can become really daunting if you don't walk in with the mindset that, okay, as I learn this thing, I'm going to start seeing gaps in edges of my knowledge where they lay. And I need to adjust for that and be peaceful with myself and not expect me to know all this stuff. And also not punish yourself for the things that you don't know yet. Because I'm going to tell you something. People that don't know anything are experts. Business owners know this thing. A lot of the people that have never run any kind of business venture or done anything entrepreneurial, they have a ton of information to give you about tips about what you need to do to run a business. And they are very confident in their knowledge. And the reason why they're confident in their knowledge is because since they don't have a ton of working experience with it, they think that's all there is to need. That's all their knowledge is all they really need to know to start a business venture. Meanwhile, the business owners stuck with this thing where it's okay, the more I learn, the more I'm leery about moving forward. And you realize that you may know this much, but then there's a whole universe of information that you don't know. And you get caught in this trap. And the trap as it exists is this. You end up really digging yourself into a knowledge hole. You begin hoarding information. You dive headlong into learning all there is to learn about this specific thing, whatever your venture is. And the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And so then you're down to the next podcast or YouTube channel or ebook or course. And by the time you've pulled your head up, you have a really in-depth knowledge about this thing, but you don't really have any execution. And so we're going to get into that here in a second. I've experienced this with doing video work. I've taken film courses and videography courses and all kinds of other stuff online. Before I even set up the camera and started shooting, I was knee deep in all kinds of things about sound and audio and video and stuff. And I was already coming in with a pretty decent understanding of some basic concepts of sound from 4 years working as a station manager and stuff in the college radio station. And I had a pretty good basis of it and how the broadcasting side of it works and everything, but I felt like I didn't quite know enough and spent all kinds of hours. And when I talk about resources, resources can be money, it can be time. I spent a lot of resources on making sure the equipment was right and maximizing this piece of equipment and learning all I need to know about this, that, and the third. And when you start doing that, you start going down the equipment rabbit hole, especially with video stuff. It's really easy to go down an equipment rabbit hole where you're like, okay, I need to buy this ND filter to optimize and slow my shutter speed down for X, Y, and Z in case I counter this. And I'm looking at all this other stuff, all these other things, and I'm learning there's an entire filming technique that I'm not aware of, and it's just a lot. And what happened was I had this encyclopedic understanding of how cameras function and all this other stuff, and no real actual execution of recording much. And I realized pretty soon on that I'm like, in order to actually test my knowledge, I need to actually start recording stuff. And when you start recording stuff, you realize really fast that you suck at video, that your videos are terrible. And that's okay. That's part of the learning process. You learn about, okay, I need to find a way to stabilize this footage. I need to find a way to color grade this footage. I need a way to improve the audio quality on this. I'm still working on audio quality. I'm doing a different audio setup than I did with the last episode. I'm constantly looking to improve that piece of it. But the moral of the story is you can have all this book knowledge and have this encyclopedic understanding of a topic, but without any actual execution or testing in the real world, that knowledge is dust. It doesn't mean anything. You know it, but you don't have any application of it. You're half an expert. And you are no better off than if you would have just purchased the camera and dove in. And so a lot of times we get caught up in this vicious cycle of learning, and the learning industry is huge. There's all kinds of ebooks and courses and stuff to draw your attention. And I'm not saying any of that information is bad information. It's all usable and actionable information, but you have to take action with that information in order to gain an understanding, a total understanding of what you've read. You have to actually apply it. And I think a lot of times we get caught up in just having the expertise and never really displaying the expertise, never really displaying what we know. So, failure to launch is the topic. All right. We value learning. We put a high value on learning in this society. And reasonably, a lot of learned individuals are also very valuable to a lot of aspects of society. Having an academic understanding of how specific things work and interact with each other is very important. But also, you need to have a practical side of how things work and interact with each other to really express your expertise in an area. So, I'm going to ask y'all a question. You have a major, let's say you have some kind of major surgery that you need to go into, enough where it's important enough for you to get your affairs in order before you go in, right? And you're in the process of talking to the doctor and you're talking about things and, how the procedure is going to go on, what you can expect, and the positive and negative outcomes. And in the midst of the conversation, the doctor reveals that you are their first actual real world patient. Now, this doctor is considered the preeminent expert in the field. This is super hypothetical, but they're considered, everybody's telling you how much of an expert this person is because they've written a lot about this thing that they're going to do. And they are the ones that have really come up with the concepts and all kinds of other things and put the pieces together and done all the research and everything. But when it comes to the actual procedure, they haven't really done it. Would you rather have them or would you rather have the doctor that has plenty of hours of surgery under their belt and they have the power of some of the expertise, but they actually have more working knowledge of what they're doing than the other person who just has the book knowledge of it? What would you rather have? Would you hire a lawyer that's considered a preeminent expert scholar in their field, but has no real actual courtroom experience? They don't have any experience practicing the thing that they're talking about. Business owners, we do it all the time. We're aspiring business owners. A lot of people have become experts in a lot of different business models. They've become experts in real estate, and they'll tell you all about that expertise, and they'll tell you all about amazing things they can do with credit cards and credit limits and all kinds of other stuff. And I talked about it a couple of months ago. They have all this knowledge about how you can take this 850 credit score and completely maximize and get all these lines of credit and everything. And that is the knowledge of somebody who's never actually applied any of the stuff that they're talking about. And so that's what ends up happening. It ends up becoming you are an expert on paper, but not an expert in real life because you've never actually applied this thing. So there's nothing wrong with going out and acquiring new skills. There's nothing wrong with learning new things, but we have to actually apply the things that we learn. And that's why it can be a sticking point for somebody with an idea, a germ of an idea, or a germ of a business in their mind, because they think that you're going to be able to read your way into a successful business model without ever testing or executing any of the things that you've read about. There's a difference. And here's the thing, and this is why I talk about it as a sticking point. There's a difference between proactively learning about something and just procrastinating and never getting started. It crosses the line where you are so focused on learning more about this thing before you take any positive step forward that the learning process ends up supplanting the action process. And now you're actually just procrastinating. You're just kicking the ball. You're just kicking it. You're just kicking the ball down the field. You're not really taking any steps forward. You've just locked yourself into the cycle of learning because it's comfortable to learn. It's easier to learn than it is to do. And I think sometimes we're not even done a service by specifically in some methods of how we learn things in school. I know traditionally growing up, we spent a lot of times practicing ideas and we learned things that we couldn't necessarily apply cleanly to our lives. Every parent on here a kid that's above fifth grade has had the conversation about why do I need to learn geometry? And a lot of us have struggled to tell them why. Aside from you need to learn it to pass math class. And we can throw out vagaries if you want to get a specific job in this, that, or the third, but we don't really know. And that's why when you learn geometry, I have some pieces that really stuck with me, that some concepts of it that stuck with me, but there's a lot of other concepts that kind of went by the wayside. Now I need a refresher in. I don't know if I could pass my 10th grade geometry course. Shout out to Miss Nelson. I'm sorry, Miss Nelson. I don't know if I could pass my 10th grade geometry course now without some kind of refresher or anything. I retained bits and pieces of it. And since my original career was going to be in construction engineering and then I had all those years of AutoCAD, there are pieces of it that I use pretty frequently that I can tap into my brain and access if I need to, but it's going to take a little bit of digging. But we struggle with explaining to our children why they have to learn these specific things because sometimes the things that they learn in school don't necessarily apply. They're not going to be able to apply them directly to their lives, and that's okay. That's cool. But as business owners or people that want to start businesses, you end up locking yourself into the very comfortable cycle of dumping new information into your brain. And then you never apply that information. And then you realize, I don't know enough to get started. So I need to go consume some more information. And you consume more information, you realize you don't know. Okay, now this new information showed me all the stuff I don't know. And then it just becomes this repeating cycle. All right. So let's talk about it. The learning trap. And here are the symptoms of it. Do you have trouble distinguishing between active learning and procrastination? Here's a couple of tips. So, do you find yourself constantly signing up for new courses, new e-courses, downloading new courses, watching new YouTube videos, and then you never implement anything you've learned, where you have thousands of hours watching courses about how to do specific thing, but you have 0 hours actually doing specific thing. Do you feel overwhelmed by the amount of information that you're consuming, where it feels like you're underwater because you know so much about it that you don't know where to start? And are you trying to chase perfection through learning and never executing? These are the signs. And there's a lot of people that are in that boat. I've done that. I do that as a business owner now. There's a lot of things that I want to try, but I end up burying myself in the books, and then I realize I don't want to put forth the energy to do it. Or I try it and I'm learning, okay, this is not too bad. And then I have a avenue to actually demonstrate the book knowledge. Because here's the thing, and this is how I perceive it. I can read something in a book and it sounds good. And then I apply it in the real world. And now I have a framework to come back to that book knowledge and reread the thing I learned. And now I know some of the nuances and I have a better understanding of the thing that I read because I actually applied it. That's how my brain processes things. I get my hands in it. And sometimes it's bitten me to the idea of I'll learn while doing. Sometimes it's hurt, but there's a lot of cases where it's been a great benefit. Specifically, like with learning how to build a very basic WordPress website, learning the code that comes behind it, learning how to build very basic Android apps. I didn't read a heck of a whole lot. I did a lot of learning as I did the reading as I was actually doing the thing, because it gave me a two-sided understanding of the thing I was working on. So, from a business standpoint, the overlearning cycle is a vicious one, because the thing that you get into is analysis paralysis, where you have too much information and it prevents you from making a rational decision. It hinders you from making a decision that you need to make. Perfect example, and I talked about it on the last episode with the Coach Mo Athletics website. I know a ton about using Squarespace as a website builder. It's my chosen website builder. It's the one I actually, if somebody doesn't have the resource to actually pay for somebody, or they want to save money and get a developer that's not going to break the bank for them, Squarespace is a pretty good platform for specific business models. And I know that. And I had very specific needs for Coach Mo Athletics that weren't exactly being met evenly or cleanly with Squarespace. And so I immersed myself in YouTube videos and diving into their information, because even though it's not exactly what I need right now, their information library is very robust. And you can type in a ton of questions to get very specific answers to very small, nuanced things with websites on their platform. And so I emphasize it's a good platform to build on, but I ended up overwhelming myself with knowledge about the Squarespace platform and the drag and drop building website editor world, that I paralyzed myself with the indecision about, because I realized, okay, I want to overhaul this website. This is how many hours it's going to take. And I had put so much time into building it that I'm like, I was sitting there, I need to do this and this and this. And I sat with a website that wasn't quite where I needed to be to do the things that the business needs it to do. And I'm sitting with that going on 3 years because I know too much and I know how long this is going to take to update it the way I want to update it. And instead of finding alternative solutions, I kept drilling down and trying to find simpler solutions through Squarespace. And it wasn't it. The solutions weren't to be found there. And that's a challenge. That's hard to admit. That doesn't feel good to admit that I wasted years on this specific thing and I wasn't getting the results I wanted. And instead of taking a step back and figuring out another solution, I poured more knowledge into my brain space and basically overwhelmed myself with information about this specific platform instead of taking appropriate actions to get things moving forward. So that's how that hindered me as a business owner. And it hindered a lot of things with in terms of developing this platform for the business. And it wasn't helpful to me. So I want y'all to understand that I'm not speaking from a place of, oh, I know everything and I'm the complete expert. I'm saying that I'm an incomplete article myself and I'm constantly writing new pages of my story. So that's what I have for that. But yeah, it can lead you into overanalysis and then you never take it a step forward. There could be financial implications. You end up spending more than you need to because you don't make the decision. You don't make the decision that saves money because a lot of times the decision that saves money requires more sweat equity. And so you prolong the learning process and you end up spending more and more money on a specific thing because you don't want to invest the sweat equity into it. Or you end up you're blowing an entire budget on learning things that may not directly improve the bottom line for you. You're just learning stuff. You're just going out and learning things that don't necessarily tie into your business's growth or your ability to make more money. You spend so much money on courses and consultants and trainings and seminars. And I'm saying that as a consultant, sometimes people end up paying for knowledge that they could achieve by just going out and doing and learning and embracing the fact that we are all imperfect beings and nobody ever gets it right the first time. They're terrified of failure. And instead of going out and failing hard and failing fast and taking the lesson, they never learn the lesson because they try to avoid failure at all costs. It ends up costing them more than if they would have gone out, tried, and fell flat on their face and realized, okay, I need actual help with this thing. Okay? Time is money. We talk about it all the time. I'd rather have $100 today than $105 in a year. It's more valuable to me now. The time value of money is more valuable to me right now in my hands because I can actually take that money and make a positive impact that can set me up to generate more money moving forward. And so it's a yin and a yang between things that you invest in and long term and what you actually need the money to do now. All right. And the most damaging thing I think is it creates a cycle of doubt in your mind. It becomes a narrative, it becomes a story in your brain that you tell yourself, a repeated lie that you tell yourself about your capabilities and your inabilities to do things. And that's a very negative thing. I'm going to be honest with you. That's a very damaging thing. And that hurts more business owners than anything else. Doubting yourself on things that you do know how to do just because you failed, it limits a lot of business owners and it prevents you from taking risks that do make sense for your business because you are so overburdened with doubt about things that you screwed up and or things that you think that you'll screw up that you never actually screw up and learn the lesson. And so you end up getting this cycle of doubt. Plus, the concept is the more you learn that there is to learn. And that puts doubt in your brain too. What we're going to do is we're going to take a brief pause for the cause. I'm going to plug my computer in because I forgot to do that. And then we're going to be back to talk about what you can do to find the balance between learning versus getting caught up in the failure to launch cycle. So we'll take a quick pause for the cause. I'll plug this computer in and then we'll be right back. All right, the computer's plugged back in. So this is what's next here. We need to talk about what you can do to get yourself out of that sticking point. This is something that we do address in our Unstuck Sessions meeting, where we talk about the failure to launch and try to hold your hand and kind of guide you through the process of implementation so that it's not this big scary process where it feels a little bit more comfortable. So we can make it feel a little bit more comfortable for you to actually implement and actually have a soft failure so that you can actually take away the lesson that's important in the failure. Because that's important. You have to take away the lesson from the execution and move out of the I'm just learn about this thing indefinitely position. So that's something we do offer with our Unstuck sessions, is ongoing consulting and some done with you services. So if you're interested, I will leave the link for a consultation in the show notes. Right now we're doing the initial sticking points meeting where we assess what your sticking points are. We do that for $100, but take advantage of it while it's there. Striking that balance between learning versus doing. The very first step is you need to set some clear goals and objectives. What do you want to achieve by learning this thing? That is very important. Why do you want to learn the thing that you're learning? How will it benefit you? How is not learning this thing hindering you? These are things that you've got to consider before you decide on whether it's worth your time. One thing with coachable athletics, one thing I wanted to do was I was actually training to do some dip my toe into a little bit of some competitive powerlifting and stuff, and I decided that, you know what, I'm gonna go get certified as a strength coach. And I was in the process of getting my conditioning and all this other stuff to get into shape so I could start pressing myself. And the program I was going to go through, you have to go down and actually get certified and test out as a coach and stuff like that by executing the lifts and then coaching the lifts on the platform and stuff. And I was full bore with that until I realized that, okay, I have two businesses, I have children, I have wife that I need to take care of, I have other things that are requiring my attention here. Do I have the time to go through this whole thing of coursework, which was almost like a college level course, to get certified in this thing and then travel for a couple of days to get licensed for this thing? How does that help us make money? And at the time, it didn't. It's something I still want to do. I need about a couple months of training before I actually embark on it again. But I had to make the decision about, is it worth pursuing this thing at this moment? Is this going to enhance what we're trying to do? Now, if I wanted to just enhance my personal life or whatnot, that's a different consideration. But I was doing it for part of a business venture, and I just had to make the decision, well, I need to focus on what we're doing here. So I had to make that clear decision and saying the objectives for this thing aren't quite lining up, and the objectives I'm laying out don't quite match with what I need to do right now. Okay. Prioritize just in time learning over just in case learning. So this is learning as you go. You need to prioritize. I need to know this stuff you need to deprioritize, I should say. You need to deprioritize learning stuff just in case stuff is important. I know a ton of useless trivia just in case I go on Jeopardy. I haven't taken the action to go on Jeopardy yet, but in case I do, I have all kinds of useless information running around in my brain just in case I decide I want to go to Jeopardy, y'all. But the stuff that I need to learn and the stuff I'm actually working on learning is getting better with managing a sales platform and email sequences and things along those lines, structuring offers, things along those lines. Those are the things that are more important that I can use to leverage better outcomes in the things I'm trying now. And those are things that I learn as I go. So having knowledge just in case is great, but understand that it's still just in case this thing occurs. You want to learn for things that are going to actually benefit you or things that you're going to actually encounter. And sometimes the best way to learn it is by doing it a little bit and then going back and studying. So implementing, studying. All right. Next thing, create a learning schedule and stick to it. For me, my learning schedule is typically while I'm in my car, because I can consume a lot of ebooks and stuff. I do read other books and stuff, but I can consume the ebooks and things like that while I'm driving. And so my normal commutes, taking kids to and from school or to and from practice and things along those times, that's when I can really drill down on that stuff. Also, showering, a little speaker in the shower where I can put on an ebook and listen to it and things along those lines. And so those are my kind of set aside daily times to learn things that I want to learn. And if it's super important, or if I can't really give it the time it needs during the commutes, then I can set aside some times during the evening or before the kids come home from school, so I can figure out those times and plug them into my day. And then seek feedback. Sometimes you need to ask an expert, what piece are you missing? And the only way you learn the piece that you're missing is by actually executing. I need to add that addendum in there. Yes, go talk to the expert. Go find the coach or the guide, that's the mentor that's going to help you. But I'm going to be honest with you. As somebody who's mentored people, it's easier to mentor people that are actually executing and trying things on their own so that they actually have a point to talk about and some points to build upon than it is to mentor somebody who has no working knowledge of the thing you're talking about. Because trying to mentor somebody with no working knowledge, you're trying to teach somebody, if you're English speaker, you're trying to teach somebody how to speak Russian, but the instruction is in French. There's a couple of gaps in language that they don't quite have because they don't have a working understanding of the thing that you're trying to teach them. And so when you seek out mentors, you need to actually go and put in the work so that you can come to the mentor with, I tried this and this and I haven't gotten the outcomes. And then they actually have a framework to teach you. Okay? Again, it's challenging and it ain't easy, y'all. I know that and here's the thing. For those of us that don't have irrational confidence, which is something I'm actually trying to get. I want to get irrational confidence. I want the level of confidence where I can cleanly suggest bullshit to people and have no qualms about whether that thing I suggested actually works. And I want to and have that ability to do it at scale. Morally, I cannot do that to people, but it is something that in a weird way, you sit down and you're like, wow, it's admirable that you have no concept of what you're talking about. Yet you have all the confidence in the world to instruct people on how to do this thing that you don't know how to do yourself. It's amazing. And you're paying people, and people are paying you to come in there and fill their heads up with gibberish. You see it on YouTube all the time. You see it with plenty of people that suggest business models that they have never tried themselves, or credit schemes they've never tried themselves, or real estate things that they've never done themselves. They've only seen other people do. And they tell people like it's easy to do, and they've never done it themselves. And there's a whole industry of people on YouTube and now TikTok that tell people things that they've never done. They tell people how to do things that they themselves have never done. They've only seen other people do it. It's amazing. There's plenty of people on YouTube. For a while it was the the car renting business. You know, that was what was hot. It was right after renting out homes. It was people renting out their own cars and stuff. And plenty of people sitting there telling you how this can be this incredible thing that you can make a lot of money on. And it's not a lie, but they're leaving out key details because they don't have those key details. They don't have the key details that help you go from good to great. There are plenty of real estate people. They don't necessarily have the details that help you go from good to great because they don't really have the working experience in this. A lot of financial folks, specifically the crypto folks, don't have a ton of real life experience with some of the things that they're suggesting. And having that irrational confidence can really be lucrative. Like where you like, even though I don't have any working knowledge of this thing, I'm gonna tell people that I do. And I can really sound convincing in my voice. And I can put that kind of bass in my voice that makes me sound authoritative. And form all my questions as declarative statements. So that instead of people questioning what I know, they're just doing what I'm telling them to do, even though I don't know what I'm talking about either. Having that level of irrational confidence can be a tremendous benefit if you don't have any scruples about what you're telling people to do. Unfortunately, I'm encouraged with a moral compass, and I can't really do that to people. And I try not to. I try to expose people to things that I know how to do, things that I've tried myself, and I can give you what my results are with it. And let people know your results may vary depending on what your mileage is. I have experience with reselling items through Amazon. I have experience with it. I know it can be a model that works. I also know that it's super cash intensive, and there's a ton of labor that you got to do. And you got to do the cash and labor until you get enough cash flow where you could actually pay other people to do some of that stuff. I understand that piece of it because I actually got my hands dirty in it. When I was initially learning about it, it sounded great on paper, and I had all kinds of podcasts and hours of experience of listening and reading and all this other stuff, all this book knowledge about this thing, but I didn't learn the gory details until I got my hands dirty doing it. And then I could come back to the information that I read and vet it out and say, okay, this sounds legit, this is legitimate, this is BS, based on the information that I've acquired from actually getting my hands dirty and implementing this thing. There are too many people out here right now that are looking for a quick solution in a box. It's not to be found. You're never going to read the book that's going to unlock the secret for you until you actually do it. Until you actually start the business model that you have in your head. Until you take the first step. You're not going to learn it. That's the reality. Until you get your hands dirty. Now, I'm not saying that you don't need to learn the basics of what you're doing. What I am saying is you do need to have a working knowledge of some of these things, and the working knowledge will enhance your book knowledge because then you can vet out what's good and what's bad information. All right, so I got off my little rant here. I think I've told enough personal stories about it. The reality is you're only half an expert if you have no working knowledge or you have no implementation knowledge of the thing that you're teaching. You're only half an expert. And I don't care how many certifications you have or how many things you have behind your name. If you don't have any experience applying the things that you've learned, you're not a complete expert in it because you don't know the nuances and different variables and things that can go wrong. It's great to read a book about flying a plane. It's great to read the instruction manual on how to pilot a plane and learn the basics of aviation and take all the courses and everything until you sit in that pilot seat and go through a takeoff and a landing successfully. You don't have any cachet to tell anybody about flying. You just don't. So be the pilot and get out of the passenger seat. That's the reality. It's the failure to launch. Many brilliant people out here who have fantastic business ideas that I know in my circle. So many people that have the skills, talents, and abilities to be amazingly successful in the things they're talking to me about on a daily basis. They have all the skills they need, but they just will not get started because they feel like the magic solution is in a book somewhere or some video that they haven't seen yet or some expert that they haven't contacted, they haven't connected with. And they overlook the skills they already have to get started. They don't want to take the chance of building their own because they're scared. And that's okay. The fear is natural and it never goes away. But you can start paying down, you can start trading in some of your ignorance for actual experience. And you'll be a lot further than if you just sat around and found another course or listened to another podcast or downloaded another ebook or contacted another mentor or whatever. If you just started and got it wrong, get it wrong at a low cost where it doesn't cost a lot to screw up. But I run into so many people that have phenomenal ideas that paralyze themselves into inaction. And those ideas sit there on the vine and eventually they'll atrophy and fall off. And then one day you'll be sitting down looking at your life and thinking about all the stuff that you didn't do because you were scared or you didn't feel like you knew enough about it. You're never going to know enough about the thing that you're doing. The day never comes. The only thing you can do is learn enough to execute a little bit, and then test what your results are. Compare your results versus what your expectations are, and then work to make the results match your expectations. And that's all you can do. So, the failure to launch piece of it, that is the very first sticking point that we're going to discuss on the Unstuck sessions. And we're probably going to come back to this because this is something that hamstrings a lot of full-time business owners, part-time business owners, aspiring business owners, podcasters, YouTubers, book writers, authors. I want to write my novel. I am paralyzed with indecision about specific aspects of it, and I'm down the rabbit hole of constantly consuming media to tell me how to write a novel instead of actually taking the stuff I've written and reformatting it. It's just getting started. Getting started will give you the information that you need. It will give you the data points you need to make correct decisions moving forward. And it ain't contained in any book. It's contained in your hands and your eyes and whatever tools you're going to use to build the thing that's going to propel you to the future. So that's what I have. If you're stuck, give us a call so we can get you unstuck. I will put the email address at the bottom of the screen. You can contact us at mail@isellwords.net to learn about the Unstuck sessions, and hopefully we can start working on the process of getting you unstuck and moving you forward. So I'm looking for it right now. Want to get unstuck? Here it is. If you want to get unstuck, hit us up at mail@isellwords.net and schedule a consultation so that we can sit down and figure out ways to get you unstuck from where you're at right now. And for a lot of people, we specialize in the failure to launch thing because that's a very natural sticking point for a lot of people that are just getting started out is the failure to launch. And that's one of the things that we do address. And we walk you through, okay, these are the next steps you need to take. And then we hold you accountable to implement those things. We check in with you. We expect you to implement and then come back to us with things that went right, things that didn't go right, so that we have a framework to teach to. So if you're stuck with an idea and you don't know how to get started and you've gone down the path of consuming books and ebooks and knowledge and podcasts and YouTube channels, and experts and gurus and all this other stuff, don't buy another course, don't buy another ebook or podcast. Set aside $100 and schedule sticking points meeting with us so that we can get started on that piece of it. Or just get out there and get your hands dirty and compare your results to your expectations and figure out a way to make those things match. That's what I got today, y'all. I'm going to make sure I go through my notes, make sure I have everything. Real quick, in summation, we talked about why learning is important and why we value learning in the society. We talked about the learning trap and how you can end up overanalyzing things. We talked about some of the symptoms of overlearning. And the symptoms are constantly signing up for new courses without implementing. You're feeling overwhelmed by the amount of knowledge that you have rattling around in your brain. And you're constantly seeking perfection through learning and never getting started with execution. Never feeling comfortable executing. Those are the symptoms. We talked about how overlearning can hinder your business. Overanalysis paralysis is a very common thing. It inhibits decision making, not prohibits, and inhibits decision making. There's financial implications to sitting there stuck, overanalyzing things and being caught in the cycle of constantly learning new things. Time is money. $100 now is more valuable than $105 in a year. And the more time you spend wasting on learning stuff without implementing, the more it's going to cost you in the long run. And then it creates a cycle of doubt in your brain where you start doubting what you actually do know because you've consumed so much information that you're questioning the edges of your own knowledge. So you've got to strike the balance and you set clear objectives, why you're learning, what you're learning. You set specific time frames so that you're not constantly trying to learn new stuff. I'm very terrible with that because in my downtime, I will actually read an ebook or listen to an ebook about a specific thing, and I don't put clear edges around it. I try to limit it to shower time, traveling to and from my commute, But yeah, it doesn't always fall cleanly in there. So I empathize with you on that. And here's a good one, the 80-20 rule. So 80% of the results come from 20% of the knowledge and 20% of the effort or knowledge. So learning how to learn, implement, and then go back and compare your notes and make sure that they match your expectations. You want to set actionable goals out for your learning objectives. So talk about why you're learning this thing, and prioritize learning as you go over learning just in case. Create a learning schedule and sticking to it. That's something I need to work on. This piece of feedback from me. And seek feedback from experts, but make sure when you go to those experts, you come armed with some kind of working knowledge and not just stuff you read in a book. Implement something and then bring your notes to the expert so that you can save time and they can actually speak to you in a language you both understand. All right. Like I said, my only call to action for this, if you want to book Unstuck session with us, fantastic. We would love to work with you. But my main call to action is get started today. Whatever this thing is, read a little bit, implement, test your results. Stop feeling like you're going to somehow trick the system by having this encyclopedic knowledge of this thing that you've never actually applied in the world. It doesn't work like that. So stop trying to game the system. Execute, try things, learn, fail hard and fast, and take the lesson that comes with it. I'm Brian. Thanks for getting unstuck with me. I'll talk to y'all episode 3. Peace.